So the last time we read The Tales Dark and Grim, you have to remember that Hansel has been sent to hell, right? Because the person who was taking care of him gambled him away in that poker game with the devil. And so Hansel gets to hell, and he's supposed to try to get out by taking 3 of the devil's hairs. And the demons threw him into the pits, but he freaked him out because he wouldn't scream. So that's where we were. And so now he's been left at the devil's house to talk to him. Hansel stood before the door. It was black, like the gates of hell, but it was quaint, too, with a knocker that looked like a bronze head of a kitten. Hansel looked at the knocker more closely. The whiskers were real. It was the bronzed head of a kitten. Avoiding the knocker, Hansel rapped very quietly on the door. No one answered. Cautiously, he leaned his head against it and listened. Screams, terrible screams, much worse than those of the sinners in the pits of fire, echoed from inside. Hansel's blood shivered in his veins. Do it, he told himself. Do it now. He put his hand on the doorknob and turned it. Hansel found himself in a living room, sort of like a normal living room, had a couch before a fire, a wingback armchair, side tables, candles to read by, and a thick rug. But it stank of sweat and body odor and sulfur all mixed together. It stank so much that Hansel nearly gagged and was forced to hold his nose to cover his mouth. He looked more closely at the wingback chair. It wasn't leather. It was human skin. Hansel could see teeth sticking out from one of the seams. He clamped his hand over his mouth more tightly to prevent himself from throwing up. The screams were coming from the adjoining room. Carefully, Hansel crept up to the edge of the couch. It was made of hair, human hair. He tried not to think about it. Hidden behind the couch, he could see into the next room. It was the kitchen. In it, he saw an old devil woman who, with a pot and pan in each hand, was cooking and singing. Not screaming. The noise was singing. Just then, Hansel heard the creaking sound of footsteps on the stairs that led up to the front door. He looked around frantically for a place to hide. His eyes fell on a closet. He ran to it and slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind him. Just then he heard the devil's voice. Grandmother, I'm home. The screaming, singing in the kitchen stopped. Dinner's ready, my dear. And now Hansel could hear the sound of a table being set. The devil helped set the table, for even the devil helps his grandmother set the table, and stood and sniffed the air. Do I smell human flesh, she asked, and Hansel caught his breath. Of course, silly, the grandmother said. There's a little boy named Hansel waiting for you in the closet in the living room. No, she didn't say that. I'm just teasing you. Of course, silly, his grandmother actually said. What do you think we're having for dinner? And they sat down and ate. Hansel sat in the dark of the closet, surrounded by extra blankets and pillows. He refused to look at what they were made of, and waited. The devil ate the supper that his grandmother had made for him, the fingers of sinners spiced with their guilty tears, and then he yawned loudly. Tired from all your wicked trickery, the grandmother said indulgently. Come and lie down. You can put your head in my lap, and I'll stroke your beautiful golden hair. The devil removed his long traveling coat, took off his spectacles, and laid them on a side table and curled up on the rug in the center of the living room, laying his head in his grandmother's lap. She stroked his hair. Sleep now, she said, sleep. Soon he was snoring, and a little while after that, the grandmother was too. Hansel sat there in the dark closet, listening to them snore. Suddenly he realized this was his chance. Hadn't the old man said that it only required 3 golden hairs from the devil's head to escape this place? Carefully, he opened the door of the closet and tiptoed over to where the devil was sleeping. Ever so gingerly, Hansel reached out and took a golden hair from the devil's head. That's what he took, right? Right? Wrong. Are you crazy? The devil would wake up immediately, and then it would be all over for Hansel, forever and ever and ever. I hope that's not what you thought Hansel was going to do. If you did, good luck if you ever end up in hell. But Hansel reached out and took the devil's spectacles from the side table, retreated with them to the closet, and closed the door again. Then he waited there all night. The next morning, the devil arose and readied himself for another day of soul collecting. His grandmother made him a breakfast of human fingernails, scrambled of course, and packed up his lunch bag. But before he left, the devil announced that he could not find his glasses, and he was furious, for he could barely see without them. I hardly recognize you, grandmother, he shouted. Where in hell did I put them? Devil knows, his grandmother said. No, I don't, he shouted. Eventually, he stormed out of the house without his glasses, grumbling about telling one sinner from another and wasting a perfectly good day of damnation. After he was gone, the grandmother went upstairs. Hansel ever so carefully opened the door to the closet. He peered up the stairs. The grandmother was carrying things to the attic. Hansel watched her carry an armload of objects up the stairs, including a crown with the head still attached to it, and something that looked like a squid, and she came back down empty-handed. She did it again, this time carrying 2 giant feet. When she came back down, she was sweating from heat and strain. She itched her gray hair, and then she took it off. Hansel grimaced at the scabby, bald head underneath. She disappeared into a room and reemerged without her hair at all, carrying instead a taxidermied child with a lollipop up its nose. As she turned for the attic, Hansel took a deep breath, and he followed her up. Each of his steps on the stairs made a loud creak, causing him to wince and suck in his breath, but the devil's grandmother was singing again, and she couldn't hear a thing. When she disappeared through the door of the attic, Hansel hurried up after her. She was half buried in boxes and strange objects when he quietly shut the door behind her. To his amazement, relief, and glee, there was a key in the attic door. He turned it in the lock and went back downstairs. Hansel soon heard frantic banging on the attic door. Then the grandmother began shouting for help, but no one was around to hear. After a lot of banging and shouting, the grandmother seemed to resign herself to a day in the attic and quieted down. Now Hansel made his way into the bedroom. On the dresser before an obsidian mirror stood a wig stand with the grandmother's gray wig on it. Around it was her makeup, thick black lipstick that looked like petrified oil slick, and blush that looked like dried powdered blood, and fake eyelashes that looked like, were the legs of flies. In the closet were her dresses. Hansel closed the door to the room. He came out an hour later dressed from head to foot like the devil's grandmother. He wore a billowing black dress, makeup all over his face. He put it on as best as he could, which was not very good, and his gray wig. He skipped the eyelashes. In the kitchen, Hansel took what looked to be a pot of human fingers out of the icebox. He put the pot on the stove and turned on the heat. Leftovers, he told himself. Then he set the table with forks and knives made out of human bones and teeth and waited for the devil to get home. When he heard the devil's footsteps trudging up the door, Hansel began to scream at the top of his lungs, and the door opened. The devil came in. "Grandmother, can you stop your infernal singing for one instant?" "Somebody's in a bad mood," Hansel said in his best grandmother voice. "Without my blasted glasses, there wasn't any point looking for sinners. I made a complete fool of myself," the devil said stolidly. "Oh, I'm sure you didn't, dear," Hansel said, and began to ladle the fingers into the devil's plate. "Your voice sounds strange today, grandmother," the devil said. "Are you well?" A cold sweat broke out on the Hansel's skin. "Of course, dear," he said. "Just a little sniffle." And he sniffled twice. The devil sat at the table, but immediately turned on Hansel. "I tell you, it stinks of human flesh in here. It's disgusting." But Hansel remembered what the grandmother had said the day before. "Of course it does. What do you think we're having for dinner?" The devil took one bite of his dinner and spit it out. "This is revolting. What is it?" "Leftovers," Hansel said nervously. "Ugh, I hate leftovers." The devil stood up and stomped into the living room and plopped down on the couch. "What a horrible day," he shouted. Hansel took a deep breath and then slowly walked into the living room. "Here, dear," he said, "let me stroke your hair. Everything will be better in the morning." And Hansel sat down in the middle of the living room rug just as the devil grandmother had done. The devil grumbled and laid his head in Hansel's lap. "Grandmother, why are you shaking?" he said. "The better to rock you to sleep, my dear," Hansel said, and he tried to prevent his teeth from chattering too. "Grandmother, will you sing to me?" the devil asked, his eyes fluttering closed. "Certainly, my dear," Hansel said. He swallowed hard, and then he began to scream at the top of his lungs. "Grandmother, what a beautiful voice you have," the devil said. "The better to sing you to sleep, my dear," Hansel replied. "Can you stroke my hair?" the devil said. With trembling hands, Hansel began to stroke his hair. "Grandmother, what delicate fingers you have," the devil said. "Shh," Hansel whispered. "Sleep, my dear." And the devil slept. As soon as the devil's breathing was nice and even, Hansel took one of the devil's golden hairs between two of his fingers and, trying not to wake him, plucked it out. "Tar and pitch!" screamed the devil sitting up. "Why did you do that?" Hansel's heart was jumping into his mouth, but he said as calmly as he could, "I'm sorry. I fell asleep and had a bad dream. I must have grabbed hold of your hair." The devil settled himself back in Hansel's lap. "I love bad dreams," he said. "What was it about?" Hansel swallowed. I dreamed there was a city with a fountain of wine, but it flowed no longer, and all of the people were sad. Ha ha! Those fools, said the devil. I placed a frog right underneath the fountain. That's what's stopping up all the wine. All they've got to do is kill it, but they don't know that, of course. He chuckled at the unhappiness he had caused and fell back to sleep. As soon as the devil's breathing was nice and even again, Hansel took another golden hair between his fingers and plucked it out. Sulphur and brimstone, screamed the devil, sitting up. Why did you do that? I'm sorry, Hansel said. I fell asleep and had a bad dream again. I must have grabbed hold of your hair. The devil settled himself back in Hansel's lap. Well, what was it this time? This time I dreamed there was a city with a tree that gave golden apples, but the tree was dying and gave no more apples, and all the people were sad. Ah, those old fools, said the devil. I placed a mouse under the under the ground at the root of the tree. It's nibbling at the roots and killing it. If they just took the mouse out and did away with it, the tree would produce golden apples again. But they don't know that, of course. He chuckled at all the misery he had caused and closed his eyes again. Again, Hansel waited until the devil's breathing was nice and even. A third time, he plucked out a golden hair. Father above and me below, screamed the devil, sitting up. Don't tell me you had another bad dream. Yes, Hansel said. I'm so sorry. The devil settled himself back into Hansel's lap. I'm getting sick of this, he said. Tell me the dream, but if you pull my hair again, I'll put you out there with the sinners. I dreamed there was a poor ferryman, Hansel said, who had been in his boat for 7 years and couldn't leave no matter how hard he tried. That old fool, said the devil. All he has to do is hand his paddle off to someone else and he'll be free, and they'll be stuck there for the rest of time. But he doesn't know that, of course. He chuckled at the agony he had caused and said, Now don't wake me again or you'll be sorry. He was just settling into a nice peaceful sleep with Hansel holding the 3 golden hairs in his hand and shaking like a leaf when a scream pierced the house and the devil sat up. What was that? He shouted. It sounds like someone's in the attic, Hansel said. Has one of the sinners escaped? We'll soon find out, the devil cried. He leaped to his feet and ran up the stairs. As soon as he was out of sight, Hansel jumped up, threw the wig and dress off, and banged out of the house. He turned for the doors of hell and broke into a run, gripping the 3 golden hairs tightly. After a while, he glanced briefly over his shoulder, and to his surprise, he discovered that the fire and pits and the demons with the pitchforks had disappeared. All he saw now were poor sinners writhing on the floor of a great cave, screaming in sorrow and remorse for all the pain they had caused. Holding the 3 golden hairs, he knew that he was seeing the truth, hell as it really was. Hell is our own guilt and our own fear and our own sin. He arrived at the great black doors. As he laid his hands on them, they swung open, and he stood blinking in the daylight. The old man, who'd been sitting on the ground just outside all this time, leapt to his feet. You're out, he cried. Hallelujah! And they said, Why are you wearing makeup? But just at that moment, a terrible cry echoed from the depths of hell, the unmistakable, blood-chilling, hair-raising, stomach-turning cry of the devil. Run, Hansel cried, and they did. They sprinted over the dusty ground, away from the black doors of hell. Glancing over his shoulder, Hansel saw the furious devil galloping across the turf behind him. For you see, outside of hell, the devil has no power over those who are not already damned, and so he had to chase them on foot. Still, he was faster than the young boy and the old man. He wasn't far behind them when they arrived at the river. They jumped in the ferryman's boat and shoved it off from the shore. Did you discover how to free me? The fireman said. I did, Hansel replied. But take us across first. Look, the devil's after us. So the ferryman rowed with all of his might. When Hansel and the old man got out of the boat, Hansel told the ferryman what to do. The ferryman returned to the other shore where the devil was waiting impatiently. After those 2 now, the devil commanded, hopping in. So the ferryman started off, but he paddled as slowly as he possibly could. Hurry, screamed the devil. They're getting away. But the ferryman said, I can't go any faster. The current's just too strong for me. Oh, heck with that, the devil cried, and he grabbed the paddle from the ferryman's hands. He paddled them across the river at the blink of an eye, but when they reached the other shore, the ferryman hopped out, and the devil found that he was stuck fast. He bellowed and hollered and screamed and cried, but no amount of protest would set him free. The ferryman then set about making a little sign with some clay and a piece of slate to explain the situation to all who came by, so that no one would accidentally free the devil. He adorned it with flowers and smiling angels. The devil fumed, but he was stuck in the boat for many, many years to come.